Oh, it's too cold outside for the rich.
I'm not from Wisconsin.
Actually, we got a warm spell coming up here after this. After maybe the next 2 days, our highs are pushing 40, which for this time of year is unreal.
Now you're just showing off.
And we've been in the negatives since we were overseas, and these guys here in Tennessee, this is unusually cold weather. The houses just aren't built for this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, we've been in the teens lately, and then it's going to be in the 60s and rainy by the end of the week. So,
yeah. If you don't like the weather, just wait a minute.
That's the weirdest thing. It's so hard to dress the kids, right? Because you get up in the morning, you go to school, it's 15, 20 degrees, and by the time they get done with school, it's 55, 60.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Let's see here. Got Will Parker jumping on already, guys. Look at that.
All right.
Is it him or is his mustache? Which one you guys are please?
Well, it's kind of like Tom Selleck, you know. It's there's two different personas there.
He's down in Arizona praying for weather it holds so he can go skydiving today. Man, God bless you, brother.
Get after it.
Alan Kelly up there in occupied Virginia. That John has a long mustache there, Alan. Got 5 folks on so far. I guess, gentlemen, a couple quick things. Check out today's show notes if you're watching this, because we're going live right now on YouTube. We're going live on Shooting Performance. We're going live on American Warrior Society. We're all over the place this morning. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Rich Brown, co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society, American Warrior Show, America's leading self-defense podcast. And I have the rare and distinct honor and privilege of being joined by my 2 very close friends, Mr. Will. Good morning, Will.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. And Will's bio is not in today's show notes, but Will is the captain or a captain of a commercial airliner, which shall remain nameless. Correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Also a jiu-jitsu guy, shooter, self-defense nerd. And we're joined by the esteemed Dr. T.C. Fuller, retired FBI agent and man about town. Good morning, Dr. Fuller.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Better than I deserve. Behind Dr. Fuller, you'll see the copy of Rich Brown's amazing memoir on violence and varietals. Pick up a copy of the links to today's shows. Also, Dr. Fuller, tell us about your 2 books that are out currently right now.
Well, we have 2 books. One is my memoir, which is Painting Over Rust, Stories from a 20-Year Odyssey in the FBI. And we have, right above my head, you'll see the front cover of No Safe Alternative, which is a book on rethinking the way we train police officers to implement deadly force.
The actual title is Teaching Them How to Kill.
So improving the way we train cops to kill. Yeah, that was a marketing ploy, and it's worked pretty well. I've gotten less pushback on that title than I thought I would.
It's a truthful comment. Eric is on. Good morning, Eric. He says, good morning, gents. Ted Leonard is on 1461. That's his coin number. If you want to find out becoming a coined member of our community is the right decision for you and your family, please click links in today's show notes. Take a 14-day free test drive. He says, sojourn between Tennessee and the Gulf, Louisiana, and Alabama. John Shriver is on out there in Yukon, Oklahoma. Troy is on. Will's on. All the cool kids are doing it. Go ahead and like and hit that share button. We got a great show for you today. And let's get started, guys. I am back.
You are back. Welcome back.
2 weeks. Actually about 16 days in the motherland there in northwestern Scotland. Was a needed break for the family, and we had an amazing time. But Will is going to take us on a journey of the fear and greed index. Take it away.
All right, here we go. So our typical beginning here, CNN's fear greed index down to 72. What I want to point out about this this week is that while it's still high in the greed zone there, if we look at the timeline chart there in the lower part, you'll notice that it's kind of sawtoothing, but the general trend is down. And that's what we want to look for, really. If we're looking at the stock market, we want to look at big trends. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in day trading and short term, and our emotions take over. But we really want to look for long term trends, really for our own sanity. And so we're seeing this kind of volatility. See it jumping up and down. That's indicative of market topping and bottoming patterns, and we're certainly not at a bottom right now. So, my opinion, we're forming a top here in the market, and we'll see what the future brings.
And we'll explain why 3 middle-aged self-defense nerds are even talking about fear, economic fear and greed index. People that are new to the show, maybe it's the first time you've seen this on content on YouTube, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought this was the American Warrior Show. What are we talking about this for?
Well, the things that you and Mike have put together within the training vault are obviously very important to keeping us safe. You know, everything from BJJ, white belt to blue belt to home defense, car defense, how to run a pistol, how to run a rifle. All those things are very important for our self-defense journey. But as you pointed out so eloquently, as 3 middle-aged men, we also have families to support. So, and a big part of that is having some idea what's coming. We never know what's coming with anything, much less the stock market and the economy, but we can look at things and see trends. And so we can then use that knowledge to better that's what I'm looking for, better provide for our families. And start those conversations within the family on, you know, oh, I think some bad times are coming. Maybe we should store a little extra food.
Correct.
Maybe we should, you know, have these other things in place so that we're if something bad does happen economically, we don't have to panic. And that's because when we panic, we make poor decisions. So we want to avoid that at all costs.
Well said, brother. Let's see here. Now, this show, I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to bounce around a bit because Dr. Fuller's put some content on here. I've put some content on here. Will, of course, is always the brains behind these Monday shows. But look at it. That's a scary thought, isn't it, Will? When you're the brains behind something.
Yeah. Wow. That you have no idea how much that scares me at this moment.
Guys, please like and hit that share button. We are just getting started. I'm going to swing over to some stuff that Dr. Fuller looked into, and it's going to be important for the next slide then when Will takes us back into the economics of shipping lanes, if you don't mind, Dr. Fuller.
No. So lately we've been hearing a lot about the Houthis, right? Who are the Houthis? They're shooting missiles and they're getting plastered by the Navy. And who are these guys? This is the first question I think that people really ought to consider, because they are having an impact. One of the notes I sent you was about how in human history, up until December of this past year, if you wanted to institute a blockade, you needed a deep water Navy, right? You needed a nation state actor, right? You had to spend decades building your fleet, training your fleet officers and personnel. You needed a GDP level investment in this endeavor. And you had to have a national will that went on for years and years and years. And you had to then decide, we're going to implement this blockade and send your ships out there and put them at risk. And then you can institute a blockade. Well, the Houthis have come up with a way to, in essence, blockade the Red Sea and therefore cut the Suez Canal on the cheap.
Yeah, with no Navy.
No Navy. I mean, and they own part of a country. And I sent you a map of Yemen to give people an idea. But you know, it occurred to me that we should know who these guys are. If they're having this level of impact across the globe, we should have an idea who these knuckleheads are.
Yeah, and we'll get to that map later in the show, Dr. Fuller.
So, okay, which is fair. So these guys have taken cheap technology, some of it free because it's been given to them by the Iranians, and in effect cut the, or at least put a stranglehold on the Red Sea. Maersk, one of the largest shippers on the planet, has stopped shipping through the Red Sea. They're just not sending any more ships. They're not willing to take the risk. The cost-benefit analysis that they did said, nope, we're not going in there anymore. The U.S. and several of its allies as de facto guarantors of the freedom of the seas have gone out there and have, you know, they warned them for over a month. Knock it off. And they wouldn't do it. These guys have a lengthy history of being belligerent, right? They were originally run by a fellow by the name of Hussein al-Houthi, you know, which translates to Hussein the Houthi, a very creative name. The organization itself was founded back in the 1990s. They're Shia, so they're closely aligned with Iran, as we discussed before. And they kind of started out as an opposition group to the then president, Saleh of Yemen. And it just kind of got worse and worse and worse with them. They've really fallen into the Hezbollah and Iranian orbit. In 2003, they came out with their slogan, their official slogan, which you see here written in Arabic. The translation is "God is the greatest, death to America, death to Israel, curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam." I got to tell you that that's a lot more poetic in Arabic than it is in English.
It's very subtle. I mean, there's undertones in there that we need to delve into.
A whole lot of mining to get down to the essence of what they're trying to get across. But it lets you know just exactly where they stand, right? I mean, there you have it. Hussein al-Houthi, by the way, he got himself killed, I guess, 04, was it? He got zapped. And his brother Malik took over, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. So that's
I noticed that everybody has the surname al-Houthi.
Yeah, well, because they're very creative people, these desert folks. So it's in essence Bob the Houthi.
Yeah.
So if you see Ibn, that's son of. So sometimes you'll see Rich Ibn Will. So Rich the son of Will, that will be their name. I'm really kind of shocked that it's not Hussein Ibn Will al-Houthi. Then okay, now we know that he's Hussein, the son of Will from the Houthi tribe. Okay, now I know who you are. Great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Fuller's given us all that context so that we can kind of get into this right here. Will, if you want to take that on.
I have one question first, though. What's motivating the Houthis? Is it just hatred of the West, or is there some deeper territorial economic reason here?
Their territorial aspirations, as stated, are simply to take over Yemen. That's what they want to do. They want to be in charge of Yemen. But I think we can reasonably presume if they do take over Yemen, it'll be sort of a first round of the Taliban taking over Afghanistan kind of thing. We'll start seeing terrorists getting Yemeni passports. We'll start seeing training camps pop up. The same old meet the new boss, same as the old boss kind of thing. We'll see the same kind of crap. They don't like the Israelis. You may have inferred that they don't like the United States. You would be accurate in that inference. So, to the extent that they can smack us around, they will. The uptick is these guys it's a small group of people in a tiny little country on the Gulf of Aden. It's their ability to reach out and really present an existential threat to Israel, let alone the United States, is nil. But these are also guys that if somebody gives them a nuke, they'll use it. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's the old I'm not scared of a country that wants 10 nukes. I'm terrified of the guy that only wants one.
Right.
Yes.
Right. You guys remember when we were kids, a big book that was out was called The Mouse That Roared. You ever read that book? It's kind of a kid's book. It was about this little tiny country that they decided, look, we're going back 40, 50 years here, but they were in essence a poor country. And they said, look, we got to do something to make some money. We're on the edge, all 10 of us in this country or whatever it was. So they decided to declare war on the United States. And they figured, look, we'll declare war on them. They'll beat us. And then, boom, the foreign aid will pour in. And that's the whole context of the book. There's some similarities here. I don't think they're expecting the U.S. to dump a bunch of money on them. But they're the mouse that's trying to roar. And of course, when we did decide to smack them around, we started on January 10th. And I'm sure we'll get to that. Or January 12th, pardon me. We slapped the living dog piss out of them without breaking a sweat. So...
I want to thank some folks for being on the show. We got Chris Edmonds out there in Vegas. Our good friend Razmik Gold member is on. Don Bothwell up there in Northwest Montana. Good morning, sir. And our good friend Doug is on from a very cold Columbus. Now he is coin number 78, a real OG. Will Parker says, Ann Wilson of Heart wrote a song about them. Crazy on you. So there you go, Will. I mean, Dr. Fuller's given us some context with what the hell is going on here with the global shipping stuff. Why don't you tell us what the impact is?
Yeah, so I would say they're hidden above their weight here on the economic side at the moment because they are affecting worldwide trade. So the global shipping recession, obviously they went way up during the pandemic. All the shipping firms, whether it be actual ships or whether we're talking about trucking, went way up during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, and then tumbled into a industry recession after that. Well, the Houthis are having one effect for sure, and that is they're jacking up these ocean freight rates. We're back up to about $10,000 per 40-foot container. That is a significant increase. Now, depending on what a person is shipping, let's say you've got, shoes in a 40-foot shipping container, an extra few $1,000s for even double it, call it $5,000, over however many pairs of shoes that isn't going to have a significant impact. But you do that over more and more things. And I think even more importantly, and it is factored into the price, is the time. They're adding about 10 to 12 days to go around the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa. Also, weather's going to become an issue there at some point going around the Cape of Good Hope. So we're bringing these things together. This will affect in the inflation numbers, our what we call our CPI here. It's already having some effect in Europe. It'll take longer to get here just because it's a little longer transit, and we have a larger economy, so it's going to take more of a change to make a meaningful difference on that CPI number. So they're hitting above their weight in this area, and of course, this is why anybody really cares about what they're doing, right?
Most shipping to the United States out of Asia and Indonesia tends to go across the Pacific, does it not?
It does.
Well, that's what I wanted to show. Check this out, guys. This is kind of the tell of the tape here. You can see the green shipping lanes were before the Houthi attacks, and then the purple is the change in the shipping lanes after the Houthi attacks. So if you look at that, I mean, a lot of it is coming from Asia. Look at that. It's coming around the tip of India. It's coming out of China. And I was shocked to see, but of course that it does come from that far away.
It does. And also it's not just the container ships as well, but obviously the oil tankers.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, again, so like you said, that's adding on a lot of time and a lot of money. If you've got 1,000 pairs of designer shoes on there and it's costing you $10,000 to ship that container, then shoes are going to be at a minimum marked up $10 per pair.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing with, and I hate to say this, but there's a demographic, perhaps the left, that thinks this is price gouging. No, it's not price gouging. It's realistic economic conditions that are affecting the price of things.
For sure.
Well, also, to me, it underscores also the fact that the U.S. is out there doing the heavy lifting. I mean, everybody wants to badmouth the United States and our militaristic nation and our projection of power. But at the end of the day, I don't see the Chinese out here ensuring the shipping lanes. I don't see the Russians out here ensuring the safety of the shipping lanes. I see the United States leading a Western coalition out here trying to get these guys to knock it off. And nobody's talking about invading. No one's talking about we're going to go in there. I mean, I think we may eventually get to that point, but nobody wants to go in there and conquer Yemen. Yeah. Right? We're just like, look, you guys got to stop. And they tried talking to him. But again, as we've said here often, you can't have a conversation with someone who's trying to crush your skull with a tire iron.
Right.
We got to get the violence stopped, and then we can talk.
Yeah. Thank you to the 21 folks watching us live. Chuck Renfo is on. It says, good morning. Have a blessed day from Merritt, Texas. Thank you, sir. You can kind of see this timeline breakdown. Let me load this up here for you. Shipping companies have tripled the price. So like when Will told us, it's up to $10,000 per 40 foot. I mean, that's a triple over what they were being charged. So that's significant. And then they also have, okay, you want to take your tanker ship through the Red Sea or the Suez Canal? Great. Insurance premiums are through the frickin' roof. So this trickle down effect is real.
And insurance has a lot to do with shipping. The insurance companies basically control the shipping companies.
Mm-hmm. What's Will Parker saying there?
It says, here is the question. Why wouldn't nations get together and send in a multinational force and wipe them off the map? Lack of commitment, no desire. I would guess nobody wants to risk having flag draped coffins coming back to their country would be a part of it.
What do you think, Dr. Fuller?
I think that we've got some war fatigue in the United States. To Will's point, we've got a lack of desire to see flag draped coffins. And at this point, it's not really necessary. At this point, we can plaster them. We've only got a couple of destroyers, a guided missile sub, that's in some ground based, and a few fighters off of a carrier hitting them right now. And it's slapping them around pretty good. I mean, that initial assault was 80 cruise missiles. It took out 20, depending on whose numbers you believe, 20 to 30% of their combat force, their ability to project power. We can do a lot of damage by not and like machines, not money, right? We can send machines in there to do the job, and machines, not people. We don't have to risk bodies, but all it's going to take is them to hit something and sink it and kill a bunch of people, and I think then they'll say, okay, the cost benefit analysis is such that we're going to just have to go in here and stomp these guys flat.
Well,
there may be some JSOC Task Force Orange guys in there lasing targets. There's something in Yemen. They've had a presence there for a long time.
I promise you that there are special forces guys on the ground. They're training the locals to fight against them. But these are low intensity conflict defined, right? And that's why you have special forces. I mean, they're cool, but the reality is they're not expensive. Those 80 cruise missiles that they launched would fund probably the entire U.S. JSOC budget for a decade. What I mean?
Yeah. And that was the thing we talked about before I went overseas, that we have enough cruise missiles if we did a peer-to-peer war with China for like 5 days.
Yeah.
And the more we smack Houthi around with those cruise missiles, the less our stockpile is going. So,
sure. And there are a lot of nation state actors that understand that.
Rick Montana is on from Montana, and Tony asks, why isn't Egypt taking action? Dr. Philly, you want to take that one on?
Well, they're not being threatened, for one. They're a Muslim nation, for two. I mean, let's face it, they don't really have a dog in the fight at this point. I guess to a certain extent, there's some shipping that comes in through the Red Sea. And I'm willing to bet you that if an Egyptian flag ship sailed through there, it would do so without a problem.
Without molestation.
They wouldn't be molested at all. And they can use the Suez Canal at will because it's in their country. So their only real problem is that corner where it goes from the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. And I don't think the Egyptians have a problem at this point. So if they do get involved, it'll be as a result of, I think, international pressure.
Yeah. And Will, you want to take that question that Don is, or the comment that Don has posed?
Sure, I'm interested to hear what you guys think on this. The Houthis have also demonstrated the importance of alignments, even 2 tiers down. They've announced that Russian and Chinese ships will be granted unimpeded access to the Red Sea. Russia and China are friendly with Iran, their sponsors.
Yeah. And it's no different than if England all of a sudden said, you know what, Russia and China, you can't come through the English Channel. But the United States, you can come through. Okay. Well, I mean, there's no surprise there. It's simply heightening tensions. It's making bigger problems. You've already got what is, in essence, a Saudi Arabia versus Iran war going on in Yemen. The Yemeni civil war is sort of becoming for those two nations what Vietnam was for the United States and Russia, or Afghanistan was for the United States and Russia. It's a proxy war with the Yemeni government, central government being supported by the Saudis, and the Houthi rebels being supported by the Iranians. It's the same old crap we all grew up with, just different countries involved.
Yeah, and
not completely different countries.
Well, here's the thing. The way I think of it is Dan Carlin labeled his of hardcore history, labeled his series on World War I Blueprint for Armageddon. Mm-hmm. And that is that the fabric of national alliances were such that it was a blueprint for Armageddon. And when I see things like what Don pointed out there, that these alignments with BRICS nations and other things like that, we are, and I don't want to make more of it than perhaps needs to be made of it, but it seems to me like we're getting another blueprint for Armageddon with another potential world war. Am I off base there, gents?
I don't think you're off base. I mean, international politics and geopolitical considerations have always been an issue. In the last 20, 30 years, things have calmed down considerably because one side was broke, right? I mean, the Russians were recovering, the Chinese were building up, but now we're getting to a point where that's less of a concern for both of them. And we're starting to see both of them start to expand their footprint. And that means getting tentacles into other countries and using other countries just like they did in the Cold War. It's strange, I think, given what's been going on the last 20 or 30 years. But when you look at things in a larger scale, this is just normal human behavior. I mean, this is just what nations do to one another, and they have forever. And it's just kind of what we have to live with.
Yeah. Strange bedfellows, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the tensions rise. And there's something to be said for when you had the Russians and the United States squaring off, that the Russians tended to keep their client states on task. They kind of prevented the little wars from bursting up unless they wanted them and they could control them. And when the Russians went away, that control largely faded, and we had all kinds of brush wars pop up all over the place. So maybe we've got some of that echoing through what's going on now, and it's going to be difficult because a lot of the people that are in charge now didn't grow up, didn't make their bones over the last 30 years dealing with that kind of statesmanship and brinksmanship.
Right. Just thank you to the 23 folks watching us live. Please like and hit that share button, guys. We're just getting going here. Guile, our friend out in the Philippines, says, "Good morning, guys. Is this coffee with Rich, waking up with Will, or talking with TC?" Just kidding. Great to see you all.
The one thing I'll throw in there is a big part of the world order post-World War II, Bretton Woods, was the United States guaranteeing shipping, the safety of shipping lanes. And right now, to an extent, it's being shown that we don't have that control in that one area. I'm not saying we're losing control of the entire globe with that, but a big part of the underpinning of globalization is safe and protected shipping routes. And that has been the purview of the United States since post-World War II. So I see that from an economic standpoint as a beginning of a threat. I wouldn't say it's a threat at this point. This is very localized, but it's something that we as the United States need to keep a lid on and make sure the world knows that we're still guaranteeing those safe shipping lanes. Because imagine what insurance rates would do if this was breaking out in 2 or 3 other parts of the world, maybe the Straits of Malacca, and take your pick on anywhere else.
Yeah.
Or if the U.S. just started to pull back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If we just said, you know what, we're not going to have an 11 aircraft carrier, we're going to have a 5 aircraft carrier, and we're going to drop back our ships. Well, either one of 2 things happens, right? Initially, you get a power vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. And then you're going to see criminality of all shapes and sizes pop up. And then someone's going to fill that vacuum. Someone's going to step in.
Yeah, and I'll give some historical context to this. Reading a really good book, The Making of Scotland. I was there at Leakey's bookstore in Inverness and picked up a really good book. And it's talking about how there was some internal conflict in Gaul, so they needed to pull back some soldiers from Hadrian's Wall and go deal with another problem with the Celts rising up in Gaul. So they did that, and that vacuum, somebody's got to fill it. So they brought in some Germanic tribes to kind of be a buffer state there, and you lead to the Battle of Hastings in 1066. I mean, these things have trickled down. It takes time, but history, guys, it has potential to repeat. Will, talk to us about this, my friend.
Sure. So from CNBC, fears of prolonged Red Sea shipping crisis fuel inflation fears as oil retail cargo delays rise. So, like anything else, a prediction is worth half of what the paper it's written on is worth. There we go. Thanks. Memory isn't as good as it used to be there, brother. So, basically this could turn into this. So they're throwing out the idea it could happen. But the real angle I want to get out of here, going to Tony's point earlier, these diversions are immediately eating into Egypt's economy with its GDP relying on the Suez Canal. The numbers were later on in the article, and I didn't want to clutter slides up with it, but it is a significant amount of money. I believe when an oil tanker goes through there, they pay an overall price to use the Suez Canal, and then additional fees come up to like $500,000 to $700,000 per transit.
Wow!
So it's real money. And then they also bring up another point here. The country's other significant source of revenue, which is travel tourism, has been decimated because of the Israel-Hamas war. So Egypt may start exerting some pressure in there. It may work, it may not, but Egypt's going to start getting squeezed. And the angle I was looking at this from was a deteriorating economy typically starts with youth unemployment, and a bunch of unemployed, in this case mainly males, in Egypt is a ripe ground for radicalization as well.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Which leads us back to this slide, Dr. Fuller.
Yeah, real quick, I lived in Egypt for a long time, and you haven't lived until you've seen a oil tanker transit the Suez, because it's just flat as a board out there, and all of a sudden you just see an oil tanker in the desert, because you can't really see that the Suez is there until you're right up on it. So you just see an oil tanker sailing across the desert. It's the damnedest thing. Anyhow, so what you're looking at here is Yemen, and it's broken down by colors to show you kind of where the different forces lie. The red is controlled by the central government, so you see the majority of the eastern part of the country, and then a couple of small enclaves near the coast. The yellow is controlled by a transitional council that is backed by the UAE. The Houthis have a problem with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. You'll see a little white speck in there that's controlled by Al Qaeda and ISIL. I don't know that we need to worry about them right at this moment. They've got clearly bigger problems. But the green is the Houthis. That's where the Houthis are hanging out. And as you can see, they're maybe not right on the narrowest point, but they're pretty damn close. And any missiles that they have can certainly cover that distance. And it puts them in a great place to choke off and limit what's going on there. It's also a tough spot. I mean, our ships aren't designed for hanging out in narrow waters like this, right? We like the Pacific and the Atlantic. We like great big chunks of water. You nautical types like that sort of space, right? I understand, Rich. But things get a little tight in here. So that's why you've got, some Arleigh class destroyers. And frankly, that's all you really need right now. I think it'd be a real attention getter if they parked the Missouri off there and started broadsiding the country. But, that's more a PR thing than anything else these days. But that's sort of the lay of the land in Yemen. And body of water to the left is the Red Sea. The body of the water to the south, or the bottom of the page, is the Gulf of Aden. The Gulf of Aden drops out into the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean, and you can get at the world. But if you want to get into the Red Sea and you want to take the Suez, you got to come right through that little narrow chunk of water.
Yeah, they got geography on their side. No question about that, my man.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is something that I talked about with I had Matt Little on Friday's show, and a great show. Go back and watch it. And Matt Little, retired Special Forces guy, a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I said, hey man, for the record, 54-year-old guy, always paid attention to the world going on around him. I've never seen anything like what's going on. And I just want to lay these out there just to kind of bring everybody up to speed, because any one of these things would be dominating the news, but we have a constellation of issues. You got the United States is at war with an Iranian proxy in Yemen. Pakistan is attacking Iran. Red Sea and Suez shipping lanes are at risk, leading to higher prices and longer commutes. Israel invaded Gaza. We've got 25,000 dead in Gaza alone after a 9/11 style attack. Now Israel's hitting Iranian targets in Syria. I understand they killed some pretty high-ranking officers in that attack. American border is an absolute meltdown. Cartels, fentanyl, military-age males from hostile nations invading us. What the hell is going on there? China's growing influence in Asia, whether that's BRICS, CIF. They're building islands out there at the rapid rate. They're building a navy none of us thought they ever could. The yuan is growing. Manufacturing is dominated in China. A spy balloon just floated over our nation. U.S. is in a proxy war with Russia after they invaded Europe. Let me say that again. Russia invaded Europe, if you can believe that. Let me bring you up to speed here. This time last year, F-22 Raptor shot down 3 UFOs, UAPs, whatever you want to call them these days. And the most powerful nation in the world claimed they could never recover any of the wreckage. And the whole world just went back to sleep. Now we've got 2024 is upon us, and the election and the threat of internal conflict has perhaps not been this since 1859. So with all that, gents, I'm going to ask each one of you, here's the $1 million question. What concerns you the most? And it doesn't have to be on this list. It could be completely something else. Who wants to go first?
I'll bite off. My biggest thing is with this shipping is hair product not making it across.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, that's by far and away. Exactly. Actually, my biggest concern on that list, which there's plenty on there to be concerned about, brother, but my biggest one is the internal conflict. By far for me. That's the one, and everything else can play into that, right? Mm-hmm. But that's the one we're going to see at our doorstep, affecting us all across the country, and then affecting us really until not a full generational term, but it's not going to be, election's over, let's move on. We saw how that worked out in 2016. This is going to continue on for some time.
Dr. Fuller?
I agree. The internal problems of the United States is what's going to shelve us and distract us from a lot of these external issues, which is going to let bad actors have a more free hand in which to act. Our internal issues are going to cause us the most direct problems, most immediate problems in our individual lives. I think our next election is going to be a free-for-all. I mean, you've got political parties doing things they've never done before. There's never been a presidential candidate that's being actively criminally prosecuted. And he crushed Iowa, right? I mean, this is a guy who didn't run much, and he's letting things kind of go. He's running a little, he's campaigning a little, but he doubled and tripled his opponents' percentages. I mean, it was nuts how well he did. And I guess DeSantis fell out of the race yesterday,
Yes.
and immediately endorsed Trump. I think this is going to set up a repeat of our last election cycle, where you had the vast majority of the media and a lot of upset people on the left taking to the streets, rioting. All that's a distraction that the government has to deal with, which leaves them less time and energy and ability to deal with foreign entanglements. And the foreign entanglements are on the rise. It's almost enough to make you think maybe other countries smell blood in the water, smell weakness on the part of the United States. And so they're acting out in ways that perhaps they wouldn't if the United States was perceived to have its house in order. I'm not saying the two things are linked. Correlation does not prove causation, but it's a damn fine indicator.
Yeah.
So those internal strifes that we all know so well worry me the most, because those are the most fragmentary. They're the ones that are going to impact us the most immediately, but they're also going to have long-term impacts that we're going to be dealing with, and our kids are going to be dealing with. As I told you guys today, my son turned 9 today. Well, we get in a shooting war with the Chinese in the next 10 years. Well, guess who's going? And that concerns me, right? That's an immediate concern for me as a father. It's also a concern for me as an American citizen. I kind of miss the days when the adults were in charge.
Yeah.
I really feel like we have adults in charge right now on either side of the aisle. I mean, we have a lot of posturing, a lot of very angry people. And that's concerning.
I want to get to some comments because, for the record, I agree with you. It's odd that we're all on the same page, given all the list of things, and I could have went with probably 20 things, but just those things alone to me were pretty bad. Is that my dog?
No, it's mine.
I was scared. Let them know I was scared right here, right here. Very scary. Yeah.
Well, as Rich will recall, we once had somebody came in my house during a show, and that
Really?
that was a little bit
fun.
uncomfortable for a moment there.
Yeah.
I'll get to some of these comments here. Doug says these, and it goes back to what Dr. Fuller just said. These little proxy conflicts are meant to be death to the U.S. and Israel by 1,000 duck bites, at least in my opinion. While they are primarily funded by Iran, I also wonder if Iran is being propped up by another world power, say Russia. And that goes to Alan Kelly's point here. He says, my concern with all this in the Middle East is a multi-front conflict there, and China, Russia, and North Korea get feisty. Are we prepared, or can we handle this, our current military situation? Cheryl Atkinson had on her show last night this question. The conclusion is we are possibly screwed. What do you think?
Well, sure. Proxy wars are always down. Oh, no. Yeah, it's on now. Will's got the.
Oh, there we go.
But, proxy wars are cheap, right? Russia can't go toe to toe. There's no two nations on the planet that can stand up to the United States in a conventional war. If you look at just the raw numbers, that tells the tale, but also our experience, right? We've been at war for 20 years. We've got people in all levels of command who know what they're doing in the military. So no one wants to go toe to toe with us, but you don't have to.
You don't have to.
You throw throw a couple $1 million at the Houthis and they'll do it, right? Yeah. And then you're losing some money, but you're not losing lives. And you can reasonably say, plausible deniability. Hey, we didn't launch any missiles. We gave them to them for self-defense. How are we supposed to know they were going to, shoot at the merchant ships? It's just a lot cheaper and it's an easier. And the United States has done it too. Let's not, pretend
we're doing it right now. Come on,
doing it right now. It's just a lot cheaper and easier to have other people fight your fights for you.
I want to go back to something that you said, Dr. Fuller. You said, never seen a political president attack like this. I saw this on Twitter yesterday and took a screenshot of it because it's so poignant. I'm not going to say who it's from. It's a blue check guy. So they banned a sitting president from Twitter, impeached him twice, jailed his supporters, raided his home, and indicted him 4 times, and then got on TV and told us that we're the fascists. And I'm like, damn, that's poignant.
Yeah, and you'll be interesting to put that up with the background of our sitting president in his, in his red speech at the Marine Corps barracks from a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Will, you're muted, buddy.
You're muted, brother. I want to.
Sorry about that.
What's the tinfoil for, Will? What was that about?
The tinfoil is for going to Dr. Fuller's point about the Houthis and deniability. And it goes right into Tony's point here about BRICS and their allies. So they have these BRICS meetings, right? You think maybe some people might get together behind the scenes and go, you know what, how can we harass the United States through third parties? Of course, this happens all the time, but now you have an overt alliance of countries that are hostile to the United States. And suddenly things are popping up that are affecting our economic numbers, will affect our economy. And of course, playing back into the election, we know that they can play the social media game with that as well to affect the social aspect of the election, right? The competing protest sort of thing.
It's basically propaganda. And propaganda works, right? And even if worst case scenario, there's involved in an active conspiracy where they're meeting and they're having conversations and going, you do this, you do that, you do the other thing. But even if they're not, right? They all want to kind of get to the same destination. Right. They all are in the same kind of ocean. They may be in separate boats. But they all want to land in the same place. Right. And if I do this thing, the Russians will see them. Maybe they'll do their thing. Oh, and the Chinese will see, they'll do their thing. Whether it's an active conspiracy or it's not, from our perspective, is less of an important.
Right. Does it really matter if it's active conspiracy or not? I liken it to my long-held theory on the media is I don't think there's a smoke-filled back room with, Democrat media. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It's that they live, work, and exist in an echo chamber, so that's normal.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's my point. The Pax Romana, for whatever you want to say about it, I mean, it did keep peace, right? And I don't think that the Gauls, the Picts, the Britons, the Visigoths, all these other loosely connected Celtic tribes got together, like to your point, Will, in a smoke-filled back room and said, this is what we're going to do to just cross the Danube and to crush Rome. But it happened. And for what you want to say about the Pax Americana, the American peace has been kept, and bombs haven't gone off in mushroom clouds and shit like that. So be careful what you wish for there, BRICS countries, because once Pax Americana is swept away, what comes next?
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times we lose sight of the fact that what's the peasant want? What's in Rich's Pax Romana example? Is his life substantively changed? Whether the Picts are in charge or the Romans are in charge, I mean, he's still gonna have to pay a tax, right? Somebody's gonna come along and take some of his food, take some of his chickens. Whether it goes to London or it goes to Rome, it's immaterial to him. He's out 5 chickens of his 12 chickens, right?
Amen.
Does it matter to us on a day-to-day basis if the Democrats are in charge or the Republicans are in charge? Well, it didn't for a long time, but when one day one guy's in charge and my gas is $1.75 a gallon, and the next day a different party's in charge and my gas is $2.75 a gallon, then it gets my attention, right? Mm-hmm. Then I start to say, well, what the hell, man? Clearly you can't be trusted. What changed? I don't know what changed because I want to go to work, and now all of a sudden my budget is shattered. And I always use as an example the single mom with 3 kids, right? What did that just do to her budget? Mm-hmm. Right. We're fortunate enough, as are many of your viewers, that a gas price hike like that is not fun, but we can absorb it, right? We're not going to go hungry because of it. That's not true for every person.
Right.
That's just not. And it's not true for the majority of people. And I think we lose sight of that so easily. And these people can be so glib and so flip about things inside that beltway. And that's both parties. Yet they completely lose sight of the fact that, this impacts real live people. And Hunter's not going to get killed in an airstrike, with the Chinese fighting over, Taiwan, but our kids might.
Right.
Right. and I think they lose sight of that way too fast, and we all pay the price for it.
And to your point about it didn't really matter if Democrats or Republicans in charge. I never thought about that, but it's an excellent point, Dr. Fuller. And it is the rise of the executive order has come out over the last 3 or 4 administrations, right? I mean, it was always there. There was always some, but I think President Biden had 37 on his first day, if memory serves.
Used to be used sparingly.
Yes. And now and my argument has been, I don't like executive orders from either side because we're not a dictatorship that changes every 4 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. And executive orders are dictatorial, in my opinion. We're gliding more that way. Where if let's just say Trump gets in next, because I think he's the presumptive Republican nominee at this point. If he gets in and does, 74 to double Biden, well, that's 3 times as bad, in my opinion.
Yeah. In my little worldview, it started when we stopped declaring war, when the presidents could start sending military forces without declaring a war, right? So to me, that should have been the end state, right? The first thing you should have said is, we're going to paint all yellow lines white on roads or some crazy crap like that. But they went right to the top, right? I'm going to war, and I don't care who's coming with me. I'm the commander-in-chief. I'm sending troops. And once you do that, that's not just creeping the door, that's kicking the door wide open. Mm-hmm. And I think it put us on a path over the last 40, 50, 70 years, depending on when you want to kind of date this from, that we're on now, to your point, Will. That leadership by fiat, it's worrisome. It's worrisome to me because they'll infringe on constitutional rights without a vote, without any sort of checks and balances being imposed by either side. Now, why? Because there's gridlock in our Congress. Okay, I understand that.
True.
Some things have to be done and to run this country, and Congress isn't doing it. I mean, when was the last time they passed a budget?
Oh, gosh. It's been 10 years at least.
At least, right? And you got one job, Carl, right? Yeah. Pass a budget, and they don't.
Let's deal with one job.
Just one thing. You got one thing. You control the purse strings. Well, they're doing to the purse strings what the Houthis are doing to the Red Sea.
Amen. Yeah. Well, we talked about the shipping lanes, and we beat that to death. Let's get back to things probably a little closer to home. Will, what's going on here?
All right. So again, we talk a lot in economics about lag effects, right? Well, this is a big one, and this one's going to affect all of us, whether we rent or own. Whether that is on the ownership side, whether we're actively trying to acquire a new home, sell a home, or we're just looking at our personal financial statements. So multifamily deliveries will top last year's levels by 50%. Now, last year was a record in 36 years. And this 2024 is going to top that by 50% for the number of multifamily homes coming on the market. Now, that will affect, it's mainly in the South and the West, which is where the big push of this is. But it's edging over towards it's cheaper to rent than buy right now. When we are going to more than double the new multifamilies coming on the market in 2024, it's going to get that much cheaper to rent because they need to fill those places up because they need cash flow. And there's a pretty good chance these new developments are going to lose money either way, so they want to lose as little as possible. So suddenly when people stop wanting to buy existing homes or new built homes, that's going to affect that market. And the housing market, as we've talked about before, ripples through much of the economy because someone buys a new home, they're going to go buy furniture and a washing machine, a dryer, a fridge, and so on and so forth.
This is to your point. I want to pause here. Like chapter 1 of the Millionaire Next Door says you may have to upgrade the car sitting in the driveway. Suddenly, you got the McMansion now. The Honda Accord can't sit there anymore. We got to get the Lexus or the whatever the flavor of the month is. So you're so right, and I hope people understand that this trickle down effect is huge. And when you have something like this going on, man, brace yourself.
Yep. Well, this also diverts resources and effort from single-family home builds, I would assume.
It has to some extent, but the multifamily timeline is very long because these are typically larger complexes, the permitting and environmental stuff, and then the actual buildings. You're talking in some cases, 1,000 units, if not more, in one complex. Hence the lag between they started this permitting process in 21 and even early 22, and they're just now starting to get occupancy permits. So it's a very long timeline. And from the developer standpoint, it's any long timeline from an investor standpoint brings risk because we don't know what the future is going to bring. So suddenly they have apartment complexes coming on the market that at market rates, they can't make the payments, especially when their construction loan is up and they have to transfer that into a regular loan. And that's not a 30-year loan. That's going to be another commercial real estate type, 5-year note. They're refining into higher rates with a market that has decreasing rent prices in many areas. So they're going to get squeezed, and some banks are going to end up with some of these back. How many? Who knows? But there's going to be some people who eventually throw their hands up and just jingle mail an entire complex back to a bank.
So what's the draw? What drives them in an environment like that where there's so much risk involved in doing these massive plus massive construction projects on a larger scale? Why are we seeing a 50% increase?
Well, the 50% increase in units coming on, because when they started that, there was a shortage in 2020, 2021. There was a shortage in housing because of the demand brought on by stimmy checks and cheap money. So that's when it started. And of course, it's never going to end. So we can't say, well, this is looking back with the benefit of history, of course, we can go, well, this is a temporary thing, right? COVID's a temporary thing. Stimmy checks are temporary. I think that was a reasonable thing to think either way. But the beauty of being an investor at these levels, of way above anything I've ever done, is you're dealing with OPM. It's other people's money. So the developer may go out of business, but the person who owns the real estate development company, they're going to do fine because they, for the most part, used other people's money.
I want to get to a couple comments, gents, if we could. Bob says, "Oh boy, can the internet survive these three?" Let's see here. Doug says, "What we are seeing in this area," and Doug is in Northern Ohio, "is that many young couples, even those with families, don't want to live in the same residence for more than 2 to 3 years, so they rent townhouses and condos as opposed to owning their own homes. My evidence is anecdotal, but many have told me that by renting, they do not have to spend their own time and money for repairs and upgrades. They feel that they are ahead in the long run." What say you, Will?
And that is somewhat of a generational thing. Xers like us, while we had better cars and music, the flip side of that is these were raised by boomers. It was an ownership society. Millennials to some extent, definitely by the time you get down into Gen Z, they don't want the hassles. It's the same way they want to buy a service, a monthly service for something, right? They want to rent the electric seats in their BMW. They don't want to own them, right? And that's a generational change. So you're seeing that with these renters because they're like, there's no stress. I pay my rent each month, and if something breaks, I call somebody up and they come fix it, and it doesn't cost me anything extra.
If I could add on to that, I have an older daughter who's living in the DC area. She's an adult, lives with a boyfriend up there, and she's told me, look, I don't know that I'll ever own a home, Dad. And I point out to her, I said, look, what you're paying in rent for this nice, albeit small apartment in downtown DC, inside the Beltway up there, is more than I'm paying for my mortgage. On a 5-bedroom house I live in the suburbs of North or South Carolina. I said, you could afford a house. You guys are making very good money, the two of them. You just can't live in DC. You've chosen to live in one of the most expensive places in the world. And her response is, well, this is where we want to be. I'm like, okay, well, there's a cost benefit here, right? The cost is you're not going to own a home. Benefit is you get to live where you want to live. And she seems to be okay with that, to your point, Will, because she's just more of a disposable side, and she likes the ability to say, look, my lease is up. We may become, what did she call it? Nomads. And just go, because they can do both their jobs. They can be done online. So she's like, yeah, we're thinking about, we'll go stay in an Airbnb in Atlanta for 6 weeks, and then we'll go to Minneapolis for 6 weeks. And and I'm like, well, that's a generational difference. I wanted roots. She's had roots her whole life, and now she wants to bebop around. It's good to be young, go crazy. It's just hard to understand for us, like you said, with Gen Xers. Like, this is a good investment. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
How do you tell people to get off your lawn if you don't have a lawn?
That's exactly.
Yeah.
I say it is a generational difference, and those generational differences, like we've talked about with demographics in the past, will affect everything. It will also affect the younger generation's ability to build wealth, which will affect how they vote, how they view social safety nets like Social Security and Medicare, and that will affect elections as well.
Yeah, Bob's got a very succinct comment here. Gen X can operate a screwdriver and a gamepad.
That's right.
The newer generation is a gamepad, so.
Yep.
Alan Kelly reminds us that, hey, they had great cars and really great music back in the late 60s and 70s. Yeah, we were all born in the 60s. We get it, brother.
Yep. Except for the Mopars. The Mopars were not great. I'm just poking Alan Kelly there. I know he's a Mopar guy. Yeah.
Could have done without disco. I got to be honest.
Oh, man. Now you're hurting my feelings. Who wants to take Jeff's comment on?
Oh, I'll do it here. What does the puppet master want us to do, or what is the desired outcome? And that reminds me, the name escapes me. There's a great financial guy who I follow. I'll find it here because I want to give him attribution for this because I'm not smart enough to come up with this. And he was speaking in terms of financial stuff, but his question, it is Jim Bianco, Bianco. He, in regards to financial stock market stuff, the question he asks whenever he sees something on CNBC or Fox Business or CNN Business is, why am I reading this? And why am I reading this now? There's a reason that information is being made public now. And what are they trying to drive with that? Essentially financial propaganda. So, there's that questioning of those things. And we need to question all those things.
Okay, well then, with that being said, and I'm sure you saw Jamie Dimon's comments, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, talking about MAGA supporters and this and that. What did you make of that? And if you're not familiar, if those that aren't familiar with his comments about 4 or 5 days ago, can you tell us about it?
Yeah, in a nutshell, he basically said that we should not dismiss Trump supporters, MAGA folks, or Donald Trump. And his point more succinctly was Trump wasn't wrong about everything. He was right about some things. And you could watch the CNBC host just, right?
Like, who booked this guy? What are we doing here?
Honestly, in a lot of ways, that makes him the grown-up in the room, right?
Yep.
Because let's face it, not everything Obama did was bad.
Yeah, and the markets listen to this man.
Yes, they do, as they should.
Yep. Remember when Hillary came out and referred to all Trump supporters as what a basket of deplorables?
Yes.
That was just so incredibly reductive, right?
Yeah.
It seemed to just all of a sudden, bloop, everybody fits in a nice little ball, put them right in. And that is simply not the way human beings work.
No.
I know plenty of people that have voted for candidates on either side that didn't like it. They didn't like the candidate. They didn't want to vote for the candidate. But the Democrats and the Republicans have a duopoly, right? They run our government. And they, in essence, they're both private clubs, and they can both do what they want. And they basically said, here, America, here are your choices. You can have this criminal or this megalomaniac. Pick one.
Yes.
And we're like, really? 370 million people in this country? This is the best you could come up with?
Yeah.
Seriously? And what do? You vote third party? Okay, well, you in essence voted for the party you didn't like because you took a vote away from that party that you did like. But your third party candidate in this country is not viable at this point in history. It's very aggravating for a lot of people. A lot of us that kind of self-define as being in the middle, right? We're getting left behind as these folks appeal more and more to the extremists. And that gentleman's point was very, very well made, is that you can't just oversimplify this by saying they're deplorable or they're, or they killed Epstein, right? You can't get away with that.
Well, raise your hand if you've had to hold your nose when you went to the ballot box and exactly. And like, ugh.
Yep.
Lesser of two evils, man.
That's it.
Here's your crap sandwich. Which side do you want to bite into?
Yeah, exactly. I just want more bread on the sandwich.
Okay, some ketchup.
Yeah.
Somebody said it was a choice between like shit or shit with glass in it. Both piles of shit.
And I think we're going to be in a very similar boat this next election.
Yeah.
I really think that's. I mean, it's going to be. It's starting to look like it's going to be a repeat of the last election.
Mm-hmm.
Only
I think it will be
older.
Yep. Yes, it's going to get sporty. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So
he's going to be watching a fist fight in an old folks' home.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to remember, Corn Pop was a bad dude.
Apparently he was.
Yes.
Apparently he was. You should have just stood on your balcony and fired a shotgun blast in the air.
Yes. And did you see the guy that did that and then was charged for disorderly conduct or whatever it was? And he cited Biden talking about that. The judge didn't bite off on that at all.
If I'd have been his defense attorney, I'd have subpoenaed the president. I'd have sent him. I'd have tried. Just the media splash alone would have been entertaining.
Oh yeah, no doubt. So, all right.
Back to the show already in progress.
Okay. All right. So along those same lines, so we see the multifamily coming on, and that's over time. It's starting, but over time, it's going to drive those rents down, which is then going to pull people away from the existing home market and the new home market. So we're maybe starting to see the start of that here. December home sales slumped to close out the year, the worst year since 1995. So this is so sales were 6.2% lower than December of 22. So year over year down 6.2%, the lowest since 2010. That's for December, lowest December since 2010. And remember, 2010 was not a happy time in the housing market. No. And the full year sales for 2023 came in at, let's call it 4.1 million units, the lowest raw number for homes sold since 1995. That was a long time ago. Now, just to put that in perspective, we have to look at this. What was the population as well? So the population of the U.S. in 95 was 266 million. 2024 population is 341 million. So that's a 28% increase in population. But we sold as many as many homes as we did in 95. So if you wanted to stay level with the population, it should have been a 28% increase just to keep up with population inflation, if you want to use that term. So it's worse than the headline number makes it look.
Oh, good, because it was looking so good until you clarified that.
Exactly. You just see the sunshine radiating off of me back here. So
it's what you do, Will. It's
what I do. It's how I roll, brother. So along those same lines, Wells Fargo Bank abandons their tower as office loan losses mount. So they got a big building down in Raleigh. It's the Wells Fargo building, very cleverly named. And they're losing money because of exposure to loans backed by office properties. To the point with your daughter, Dr. Fuller, they're not going to the office anymore. They can do their jobs remotely. Even if it isn't full-time remote, it's at least part-time remote in a lot of cases. Well, that's affecting, as these leases come up, these companies are going, we don't need all this space. We don't need this overhead. And it's making their people happier if they can go either be full-time nomads or just enjoy the freedom of not doing a 9 to 5 and still getting a paycheck.
Let me bring it into the realm of anecdote, and to Dr. Fuller's point, his daughter works in the DC area, thinking about going remote nomad. I'm hearing this exact same thing from my son, who's 27. He works at a national laboratory as a research scientist, and he's like, I'm wanting to go remote. There's no reason in the world I can't go remote. I got projects that I'm working on with sponsors all over the country. There's no need for me to sit in a cubicle there on the Air Force Base. I can do this shit from anywhere. But of course, the boss is like, well, if I don't have this place staffed at X%, they're going to start taking my the room away and giving it back to the Air Force and stuff. So to your point, and it's something that Arthur C. Clarke talked about back in the early 60s or late 50s. It's like eventually with the connectivity that we're going to have in the future. And then this is the scary point, because he says that cities will become unnecessary. Men created cities because they had to come together to communicate to get things done. But when you can do this stuff remotely, what's the purpose of a city? And then the cities are just going to fall into ruin. And I think we're seeing some of that. What say you guys?
It's an interesting point. And I'm sure that the city fathers of Detroit would agree with you wholeheartedly. We offshoring our manufacturing, and we're largely a service economy. I think people like Will are still going to have to go to a central location, because you can't just park a jet airliner in your cul-de-sac. But
you can once. You can once.
I guess it's taking off again. That makes it tough.
Yeah.
But I mean, there'll always be those jobs you have to show up for, right? The guy that repairs the power lines that fall down, the cops, the ambulance folks, they're going to have to show up. But my wife still works for the FBI. Those are conversations they have had quite a bit since the outbreak of the pandemic, when the government said you can't come to work. The FBI said, okay, what do you want us to do? And they had to try and figure out ways to not come into the building and yet do the job. But I think we're just going to see that. It's just going to be tough to put that genie back in the bottle, right? Mm-hmm. And I think employers realize it too, right? Look, if I don't have an office space that I have to turn on lights for and put power into and insure, and I have to have plumbing and water and all. If I don't have to have that, if I can just put it back on you, the employee, and not pay you for it, that's a savings. I don't have to pay rent, right? I don't have to own this building, Wells Fargo. It's a savings for me. So there are a lot of efficiencies in that. It's I think one of the blocks is going to be old guys like us that are like, I got to have my ducks in the building, right? I mean, how many times did you work for somebody in the military, Rich, that yes, you could do it more efficiently if you weren't here, but you must be here. We're going to have a formation at the beginning of the day. We're going to have a formation at the end of the day. Why, sir? Because I want to look at everybody.
Yeah. Especially on recruiting, that was always the sergeant majors who, spent 25 or 30 years commanding troops that they can look in the eyeball. And then you got recruiters scattered in every city across the South, and like, it just drove them insane, man. Like, hey, this is the way of the future, brother. You better get used to it.
Now, my EOD battalion was headquartered in Atlanta, and we had EOD companies all the way up to Michigan. So it made you just had to figure out a way to deal with it. And there's a lot of O3s and their first sergeants that had a lot of autonomy, like you said, like in recruiting, you had to trust them. If you didn't trust them, pull them out of the job. Exactly. If you didn't trust them, get out of their way and let them do the work.
Amen.
Pretty simple.
Yep. And one thing I do want to point out as we talk about office space and commercial real estate in general is renting those spaces is not like renting a home where the hot water heater goes out and you call the landlord and he takes care of it in your rental house. Commercial real estate, the renter has to pay for all repairs. So the only upside of renting commercial real estate over owning is you don't have to do the big down payment, the 20% down, and deal with refinancing it. So it's from a business standpoint, renting doesn't bring the same benefits as it does on a residential side. So there's even more reason to just wash their hands of it and walk away and embrace the remote workplace.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend that works for a large power company in the area. They owned several buildings downtown Charlotte in which they had their offices, so they might have a 30-story building and they had 3 floors of that building was where they were, and then they rented the rest of it out. And they started selling the buildings off and just leasing space in the building they used to own because it's a wiser financial move.
Right. Yeah, you free up that cash. You free up that equity. Yep.
My question was then, who's buying the building? If it's such a bad investment, who the hell wants to buy the building?
Depends what price I buy it at.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
And that's what you're going to start seeing with a lot of these. There's anecdotal stuff out there of large buildings. The last one I can remember is in San Francisco that sold for something like 38% of its 2019 sale price.
Jeez.
Yeah. And they put a bunch of money into it when they bought it in 2019. They did a bunch of landscaping and stuff. And then it just wouldn't work. So they just sold it for what they get for it and then told the bank to pound sand on the balance.
Will, you want to take Doug's comment there?
Sure. After COVID, tax law in Ohio changed and income tax started being paid based on your actual work location, which was the homes of many workers. Cities like Columbus were going to lose millions. So companies started forcing their employees to come back to the physical buildings so they would lose their income and property tax breaks or could lose. So there's a political angle in there too, right, guys? Because when these big office buildings say go from being worth, making up a number for 120 million and it sells off for 40 million, that affects the property tax roll because the new owner is going, no, you're going to tax me based on the new valuation.
You know what? This reminds me, we've talked about this several times before, how cities would say, the city, they're going to charge you by how many feet that you use on the street. And then so builders started making these long, narrow homes and you get these long, fatal funnel alleyways that cities are having problems with these days. Well, in Edinburgh, when you look up, there's these beautiful buildings and the windows are a lot of them are bricked over. And you're like, well, what the hell is that? And that's because the city of Edinburgh decided we got a great idea. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to charge everybody by the number of windows you have.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be your tax. So they went, the smart, thrifty Scott went, really check this out, and started laying bricks, brick them over, and then they would paint a window on the outside. So, I mean, human beings will always find a way to get around these stupid taxes. I don't know why people haven't realized that.
Well, there was also a time when having glass in a window was an indicator of wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you could afford glass, whoa, big money.
Yep.
But yeah, people are. It's always that game, right?
Yeah, whack-a-mole.
Well, and that goes back to why socialism always fails. It doesn't account for human nature.
Amen.
So,
well, it's never been done right. That's the other problem.
Well, that's the other problem, of course. If only they would do it right.
If only it could be implemented by, I don't know, a former bartender from New York City.
Wow, we haven't tried that angle, have we?
We sure have.
Yeah. All right, so back to our happiness at Wells Fargo here. If you go back to the previous slide there, please, Rich.
Absolutely.
All right. So this is the bottom part of this one. So this move in Raleigh, they're selling of this building. So I love the names the bankers and Wall Street types come up with. So Wells Fargo disclosed last week that the total of non-accrual loans. Okay, that's a fancy way of saying they ain't paying their loan back. Okay. So this is their non-accrual loans, and it's in bank and Wells Fargo's portfolio, backed by office buildings. Okay, increased to $3.4 billion at the end of December. So they got $3.4 billion worth of real estate that they're getting repaid back on those loans. That's up from $2.8 billion in the third quarter. So in 3 months, it went up 21%.
Ooh.
That's a tough business model to make work.
Oof.
This would also explain, if you remember back, Wells Fargo, just before the end of the year, set aside $1 billion for severance packages for 2024. So they're planning on cutting headcount to get their costs down. Okay. Now, if we look back at the end of 2022, they had $189 million in non-accrual loans. That's an 18x increase in a year.
So that's not a typo. It went from 189 million to 2.8 billion
to
3.4 billion at the end of the year.
Yes.
Wow.
That's a rate of change. And that's a lot of what we look at in the stock market and trading the market is rate of change, not necessarily raw numbers, but how quickly is this changing? 18x in a year, that's a heck of a change.
Anybody got any investments that went up 1,800% in a year?
I've had some, but not last year. So I had 100x in my career of trading. Yep. Wow. Bought Netflix at 4 and sold it at 400. That was a good.
That explains how you can afford all that hair product.
Now I'm telling you, brother, priorities in life, right there.
Yep, I get it.
Exactly. Yep. So this is something to watch for. Wells Fargo isn't going to be the only one gets caught up in this, and it's more your regional banks and more of your local banks that are getting caught up in commercial real estate. The big banks, JP Morgan, don't quote me on the number, but I think it's less than 2% of their loan portfolio is commercial real estate. They have purposely stayed away from commercial real estate for just this reason. And Wells Fargo is going to pay the price for being the good guys and giving these loans out.
Yeah, clearly. And given those numbers, how is somebody going to get a loan next month?
This is where, if we go to the next slide, Rich, very, very good segue there, Dr. Fuller. Commercial real estate is 16% of the Wells Fargo loan portfolios. So that's a significant portion when it starts non-performing like that, right? And here's the big one. This Michael Santos, Mike. Okay, he's the CFO of Wells Fargo. The bottom underline there, we are still early in the cycle. So this is how I try to look forward to these things, and what I try to learn and observe from articles like this is, okay, so if we're still early in the cycle, how will I know when we're nearing the end of the cycle so that it's time to invest my money back into commercial real estate or banks that are going in commercial real estate? And I think it's the old blood in the streets. When, banks start going bankrupt because of commercial real estate exposure, wait for that to settle out for 3 months, 6 months, and then it'll be good again because we got to flush the excess out of the system. So, and to Dr. Fuller's question, the bottom one here is, why do we care? Who cares about Wells Fargo losing a bunch of money, right? Wells Fargo also has credit cards. They got out of the home loan business, which is also telling. But they have credit cards. They give out personal loans. They give out auto loans. Other banks are also exposed to commercial real estate, have credit card loans, home loans, all these things. Well, when they have to tighten that in, they don't just tighten in one part of the portfolio. They don't just say, well, we're not going to loan out on commercial real estate. No, they have to tighten up everywhere. And to Dr. Fuller's point, that's why it matters to the rest of us. Because when suddenly they start tightening up everything else, people can't go out and get loans. When they can't get loans, they can't pull that future enjoyment forward, right? Because that's what happens when you get a loan. You're pulling future enjoyment forward. When you get a loan for that new truck, you're pulling that future enjoyment forward. Well, that also pays for other people's jobs and food and everything else this month when that happens, right? So that's why I think we need to care about this.
Sure. And in the long term, right? We've already discussed the fact that cities are starting to outlive their usefulness, right? That we're seeing a trend away from cities. And if the skyscraper is no longer a viable investment and it's not needed, it's not funded by the banks, nobody wants to own them. They don't want them sitting like a great big lump on their portfolio, and nobody needs these downtown areas. What do these downtown areas start to look like in 10 years?
Escape from New York.
I was just thinking the exact same thing. We're going to have gangs taking over the top 10 floors of this building and the bottom 15 floors of that building, and no one will care because no one's going down there.
Right. Well, think San Francisco right now. Big tech hub, right? I think that's the canary in the coal mine for how things are going to look.
Sure. And oh, by the way, add in the criminality that a lot of these prosecutors and DAs are fomenting, in my mind. What's the draw? I mean, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I haven't been back in over a decade, and I see no reason to go back. I've driven down Coit Street enough. I've walked across the Golden Gate Bridge enough. What is the benefit to me going back there? Zero. I mean, there's not. And what's the risk? Well, the risks are significant.
Right.
So you've got factors pushing people out of the towns. You've got factors drawing people into the countryside, right? Right. And you've got fiscal incentives to stay away from investing in these large properties. That doesn't spell a lot of good things for these cities, in my mind.
And we've seen the leading edge with that, because what do these cities and states do as this tax revenue comes down? Let's raise taxes.
They're going to panic, and raise taxes,
right? And then we see the California to Tennessee, California to Texas thing happening, right? Sure. And then that brings strife. I was just talking with a friend who lives in the Nashville area, And he goes, yeah, some people from California moved in down the block. None of us will talk to them.
Yeah, I'm convinced the only reason people in South Carolina talk to me is because I married a local girl.
Uh-huh.
Well,
that's the
that
internal
is-
conflict. I mean, that we're worried about coming up, because they vote a certain way.
Mhm.
Even though they fled there, that they often forget, like
Yep.
you said, Dr. Feller. Well, they just Gavin Newsom made a step or two wrong. If he'd have just did this.
Now that I'm here, though,
Yeah.
tune this right up. No,
Exactly.
just
So,
stop.
and then that goes back to our earlier discussion about the biggest threat being internal strife, right? You get those new
Yep.
people moved in, now they're ostracized, but they vote, get enough of them, they change a state from red to purple to blue or wherever it is along that continuum. And then that makes the locals, the natives, if you will, more adversarial to those newcomers. Not exactly a melting pot type environment going on.
No. Well, you end up with self-imposed ghettos, right? Just like you
Mhm.
had in Hell's Kitchen. You had Italian sections of town, you had Irish sections of town. Well, pretty soon you're going to have, South Carolinian native sections of town, and you're going to have the California import section of town.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to me. A big takeaway for me for today's show is just what the future holds for our big cities.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot good on the horizon.
Mm-mm. There really isn't. So, all right. So onto this one. We've touched on this in the past, and every now and then you hear the whole wealth tax being brought up, right? And wealth tax is a matter of, instead of income tax being taxing your income, wealth tax is you'll be taxed a certain percentage of your wealth. Now, wealthy people, like the names we see here, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and so on, they'll just move where their money's parked. There's always going to be a safe haven somewhere. Even if every country in the world institutes a wealth tax, some place is going to be the cheapest one, and that's where the money will go. Just the way it is, okay? But what I found telling about this, and I've seen other studies about this, the combined net worth of these very rich folks, Mark Cuban, Ray Dalio, George Soros, Ken Griffin, adds up to about $726 billion, according to Bloomberg data. Meanwhile, the net interest on our national debt is about $731 billion per year. So the point is net interest.
Yeah.
So what this means is you could take away all the wealth of each one of these individuals and not even pay 1 year's of interest on the national debt. What I took out of that is we can't raise taxes high enough to take care of the national debt, especially with the deficits we know are coming.
This sent me down the rabbit hole, guys. So here's where I'm going with this.
All right.
This is what 151 billion grains of sand looks like. These are 50-pound bags of sugar, 50 bags to a pallet. That's 5,400,000,000 grains per pallet. So this is just an example of what that looks like. Let me show you. We're going to add another 28 pallets. Now we're thinking grains of sugar is $1. Okay. So there's 151 billion grains of sugar. Now you add in another 28 pallet load to, if every grain is $1, everybody knows how small a grain of sugar is. There's 302 billion, 453 billion, 604 billion. And finally, we're getting up in the neighborhood of what we're talking about with net interest. This is what it would take to carry all those grains of sugar if they were $1. And tell me we're not screwed when you look at it in this context.
I could tell you that, but I'd be lying.
Yeah, screwed.
Yep.
And I just wanted to go down the rabbit hole. There's 28 in this image times 5 that to get to just every grain of sand. These are gigantic numbers, but you hear them so much that everybody kind of yawns. It's like every now and then you need to pause and think, guys, we're talking about, you just can't keep up with this. Yeah. I mean, it's a math problem, guys. It only goes one direction at this point.
Well, that's just representative of the interest too. That's not the actual principle.
Yes,
correct.
And that's just servicing that. So, and obviously interest rates affect that. So now we go back to our shipping that could take months to straighten out. when that inflation goes up, the Fed's only tool to control inflation is to raise interest rates. Raise interest rates, increase the interest on the national debt, which is why I think in the end, I think the Fed will capitulate at some point. I think Powell will be Volcker 2.0 long enough to get out of his term, and then someone who's willing to cut interest is going to be put in after him. Take it for what it's worth. I don't know, but there's no way they can keep interest rates up where they are and have the federal government be viable. Can't happen.
Exactly, because how do we service that debt? How do we get there? We just print more freaking money. Every time we print more money, the value of shit goes down. It's $8 for a 1 gallon jug of orange juice. I mean, this is insanity, man. We've talked about this before. 2 to 3% interest rate per year will double the price of goods in your local grocery store every 23 years. Now we're seeing doubling and tripling on certain commodities within a year. This is unsustainable. And to Jamie Dimon's point, those are the people that are going to vote for Trump v. Biden because they think, well, shit, like you said, gas cost me $1 and something, and now it's $2.89 a gallon if you can find it that cheap.
Yep. And in fairness, and I'll play a little devil's advocate here because that's what I do. In fairness, some of this was timing. If Trump would have gotten a second term, we would have had the same inflation under Trump for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part, very wrong.
Because they printed all the money in 2020.
Well,
and then
let's
Biden
back
took over
up.
in 21. So,
but let's go back to the TARP, though, Will.
Yeah. Yep.
Double asset relief program, 2007, 2008, 2009 was it 600 billion? We laugh at those small numbers now. That was peanuts.
Yeah. Yep. So what's the
solution? How do you fix it? How do we get $31 trillion of debt to go away?
The short answer is you default on it. That's it. We've defaulted in our lifetimes. We were very young, but in 71, Nixon defaulted on the national debt. In essence, when he took us off the gold standard, it was essentially a soft default.
Right. Did that reset our national debt to zero?
It did not, but what it allowed them to do was by decoupling the money from gold, it allowed them to free reign print money versus having to pretend there was some gold somewhere to back it.
So how do you? And to me, a default means you just didn't make your payment. How do we pay off $31 trillion? I mean, how would we ever pay that debt off?
Well, the only way to do it is to print more money, and in the process of printing that money, devaluing that 31 trillion or whatever it is now down to, because of the printing of money, you're going to devalue that 31 trillion down to say what we would call 10 trillion right now, some manageable amount. And then you reset the currency, and Rich knows right where I'm going with that.
Yep.
It sounds like hyperinflation,
brother.
I think they're going to have to dance the dance of the line with hyperinflation. There's no other way. There's not enough digital and physical dollars in the world to pay off 34 trillion.
Yeah.
And the deficits keep piling up every year. There's no mathematical way to pay this off the way a person pays off a mortgage or a car loan. It doesn't exist.
If you're putting out a house fire and your method of putting it out is to keep throwing buckets of gasoline on it, I don't see a way out. Like capture a meteor that's full of gold. Well, then as off as that it might be, then you just shatter the whole world's economy, right?
Correct. There's the rub, right? So these other countries, whether it's the smoke-filled back room at a BRICS meeting or whether it's just observation of what other countries are doing that are working, they're all pushing us that way. And in fairness, we're doing a pretty darn good job ourselves, because what's every politician's answer to everything? Come up with another program that always costs more money.
More entitlements.
Right.
So what happens when inevitably, whether it's in our lifetime or shortly thereafter, what happens when the U.S. economy explodes? When it just collapses? I mean, besides the obvious devastation that's going to happen within our borders, what happens to the rest of the world?
I don't know, because it's going to depend on what's the rising power at that time.
I will tell you. And let's go back to history, folks. We saw the same damn thing. The Colosseum turned into just a rock quarry for people that needed rocks. after the fall of Rome. I mean, people within 2 or 3 generations looked at the aqueducts coming out of the mountains and go, well, they were built by God, son. That's men couldn't do that. I mean, they just, it's a wrap, you know, and again, we saw them do it with the denarius to keep the empire afloat. They completely wrecked their currency, just like we have done here with forever wars and with zero to show for it. It's not like we now own Afghanistan and can mine the hell out of the minerals and resources there. We don't have shit to show for it. Pardon my French, you know, I don't see a way out of this. And it's not for short-sightedness, because at some point, as we've said before, it just becomes a simple math problem, and it's gotten away from us, and that's that. And then we're going to have to go to CBDC, or we're going to default and have to go to war with somebody. But there are no good options at this point, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, what's the new world order? Well, the new world order after World War II came about because of Bretton Woods, and the U.S. was the winner of that war, if you will. And we set the rules, and we, you know, reaped the benefits of that ever since. Somebody else will reap the benefits of it in the future. Now, maybe it'll be us again, because, I mean, for something to be the reserve currency, there's certain attributes it has to have. There has to be plenty of it. It has to be trusted. Well, that sure isn't going to be the Russian ruble. It isn't going to be the Chinese yuan, because there's no freedom in that marketplace. Could it be us again after a period of pain? It could. I don't know.
Yeah, the Netherlands thought that too. How'd that work out? I mean,
Yeah.
Once an empire goes down, I don't know that there's any precedence. I'll have to look at Ray Dalio's book on that, but I don't think there's any precedence for them to rise again.
I agree. There isn't a precedence for it, but in each case there was a viable alternative. At this point right now, there isn't a viable alternative. That doesn't mean there can't be one in the future. China would, but they also have to have the faith of the rest of the world to put their assets there.
And their current demographic problems argue against them stepping immediately into that role.
True. So
yeah,
I don't know.
The best we can hope for is sort of a British way out, right?
Yeah,
Soft landing, still a power, just not a world power anymore.
Right.
Pass the torch to somebody else, and
yeah. And as we watch this, whoever starts coming up with a true sound money be my guess of where it goes. I don't know who that's going to be, because the BRICS are talking about backing theirs with a basket of commodities and precious metals. If they do that, then they're going to be a viable alternative. Now, of course, there can they because so many of those countries are used to being rather autocratic, China, Russia, and doing whatever they want. Can they get the confidence of the world? And not if they don't change.
And with due respect to Mr. Holland over there in the UK, he's absolutely right. It wasn't just the US.
Yes, it is true. Right. And when I say won the war, what I mean is we won the war after the war, if you will. We won the war to yeah, we won the war on who was going to be the reserve currency and how things were going to work out there.
What do you think about Jerry's comment here? Confidence in a foreign currency will come down to the best marketing campaign. Who will have the best media spin?
Yeah, that'll play into it.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to the show already in progress here.
All right, so going back to our national debt stuff, I found this interesting because when you add all these up, because it didn't seem quite right to me, but you add them up, this is 100%. Which one are you going to cut? Which ones are you going to cut? And how do you get elected or get reelected if you cut any of these? I mean, we can right off the bat, if you cut Medicare, Medicaid, other health care, or Social Security, I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. I don't care how your math works out. You're not getting elected, period.
And I'm going to tell you right now, if you cut that one down there on the corner, the lower right-hand corner, you can get a bunch of pissed off middle-aged dudes putting on plate carriers and toting M4s around. I'm telling you right now.
And in reality, it's 4% of the budget. So even if you cut it by 100%, which of course I'm not advocating for, it's not going to make any meaningful difference. It's like a personal budget. If you want to make a meaningful difference, you have to cut where the big numbers are. Now, I think the way that will happen over time is they'll means test these things. If your tax deferred accounts total X, then you don't get Social Security, or you only get a portion of it, or it's prorated, or however they handle it. But part of our problem is that each side has their sacred cows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And both sides have the entitlements. Now, some people get angry when you call them entitlements. I paid into that system. Legally, it's an entitlement because same way if Rich and TC have a contract that entitles Rich to something, that's an entitlement. So when you hear entitlement in the form of Social Security, that's the way the word entitlement is being used. It's not being used like welfare. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So, but the point is that people are entitled to these Social Security benefits because there was a contract. There is a contract, right? That doesn't mean contracts can't be changed. That's why God invented lawyers, because contracts change. And then people sue each other. And that's the way it works.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough sell. Telling people, look, yes, you paid for 30, 40, 50 years into this system, and now you're not going to benefit from it. That's a very tough sell.
It's gonna. I think it's impossible, especially with right now, because then I would come back and go, well, maybe if you hadn't forgiven all those student loans,
sure,
you'd have some more money for this.
Or maybe if Norway paid their own national defense.
Right.
I mean, I always enjoy those arguments about, well, you need to be more like these Scandinavian socialist countries. I'm like, well, first of all, they're democracies. They're not socialists. And second of all, imagine if we didn't have to pay for the defense fund. What are we paying right now? 12% of our GDP is defense. Was on that slide? If that 12 went to 10, what happens to the United States? I bet education could go up a couple points. But
that's the thing that always pissed me off. It's like NATO countries are not paying for their own fair share, even though they've got Russia sitting there looking at them, and it's like, well, no shit, they can do. Everybody gets paid 6 weeks paid vacation. Every father gets maternity leave to be home with his mommy, and all this shit. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't get that. And they all got free health care. Well, yeah, if they ponied up their fair share, and thank God for President Trump, the first president in history, that's like, hey, you're going to pay, or we're going to pull the hell out of here.
Right. And I get it that keeping a war out of Europe makes financial sense for the United States. But when you consider how much we've paid for the defense of Europe over the course of the last 80 years, at some point we've paid for that next war, right? I mean, at some point the war becomes cheaper than, keeping cheap chocolates coming out of southern Germany. So I'm not saying abandon them completely. What I am saying is, hey, you can fund your own defense, right? You can pay for your own national defense. And okay, yes, I get it. Nobody wants Germany to rearm. At some point, we got to say, look, Germany gets to rearm. Yeah, I mean, otherwise somebody else has to pay for it all the time. And I'm getting tired of our education system, for example, take it in the shorts, and then people say, well, the French are so much better at math. Well, no shit. Who's surprised about that? Come on. At some point, you got to pony up for your own. I mean, I don't expect Rich to pay for my back fence. Right. It's ridiculous. So why do I mean, believe me, I understand the real world politics involved in making sure that Europe is peaceful. I understand that. My argument is they could put a little bit more money into their own defense.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
I could real quick, because this is what a lot of us are talking about. Let's see here. I apologize for the interruption, guys, but I just saw the damn comment. Now I can't find it. But basically, maybe somebody took it down. Oh, yeah, here it is. Ted's comment. Austerity is never popular. Expect civil unrest to follow with these kind of things. You start cutting entitlements, you're going to get civil unrest. What do you think?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Everybody wants the other guy to take the hit. And if you look at the left, it's supposed to be the names from that previous slide to take the hit. The Jeff Bezos, the Ray Dalios, they're supposed to take all the hit. And, regular folks aren't supposed to take any hit. Well, regular folks also benefited from a lot of this national debt building, because a lot of this increase in the national debt went to a lot of wasteful stuff, but waste is even a relative thing, right? The bridge to nowhere in Alaska back in the day. Well, somebody got paid to build the bridge to nowhere. So, we're all going to take a hit.
Yeah. And it's probably going to take up to your earlier point. Well, you're not going to get reelected if you do this. It's going to take some politicians that are okay with being single term.
Yes.
To get in there and just make some very hard decisions and to make sure that they're survivable past their term, right? Because the first thing that the current president did was reverse a lot of the previous president's actions. And the first thing that president did was reverse a lot of his predecessor's action. So you got to make sure that you put into place things that are going to survive your departure from the stage.
Correct.
But the problem
then
is we don't elect those people.
Right. And then you're absolutely right. And how does that system change? Well, I think if you got the like we talked about last week, Dr. Fuller, if you got the insider trading out of Congress where people could not enrich themselves in Congress, being one term might look more palatable. Because there's no reason to stick around because there's no wealth creation there.
Well, we'll start with people that don't want the job in the first place. Right?
True.
You want to get something done, you force a guy like me to go up there. I want nothing to do with being back in that beltway. And I will look, okay, if I have to be here, we're going to make the hard decisions and then I'm leaving. I don't want to come back. But we consistently put people in there that want to be there. And go figure, it's evolved to a point where we're run by geriatric narcissists and megalomaniacs. I guess we get what we deserve, right?
True story right there. So, and this comes back to our internal strife stuff from Rich's list earlier. From CNBC again, divide between political elites and the working class is a major risk, Allianz CEO says. Now, Allianz is a German bank. They do a lot of good research on stuff. He was asked this at the World Economic Forum in Davos, what he considers the main global risk. And he pointed out the lack of trust from populations in their governments. Yeah. Because especially in a post-COVID world, none of us believe anything, either side, right? There's team red, team blue. They don't trust the other side at all. And nobody trusts whoever's in power, right?
And we don't trust the media to tell us the truth. I mean, Rich, where do you go for your media information?
I'm all over the place, man. Al Jazeera, BBC, Reuters, everywhere.
Right. Yep. Nobody says, I watch ABC News every night anymore. Nobody, when we were kids, they did, right? I bet both your fathers had their channel that they watched the news. Yep. Put on Channel 7, we're watching the news. Right? Can't do that anymore.
It was Channel 6 for us, NBC. Yep.
Right. And you did that. They did that because they were after the truth. Now I'll use my father-in-law as an example. He'll watch a smattering of a variety of shows, but what's his go-to show? He has one channel, and that's his channel, and that's what he watches. And I've actually seen him have it on his TV, his phone, and his laptop all at the same time. Just different feeds from the same crew. But we're not picking it because of the truth anymore. We're picking it because it appeals to our previously. It's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And they play to that, right?
Sure.
Because it's ratings. And that was the downfall of news, right? When they started putting ratings on news shows, that was the end of real news.
Yeah. All of a sudden, the marketing dollar drives the train.
Right,
amen.
For sure. This guy goes on to say, we have an increasing detachment of the political elite from the working class and the people that actually go to work every day. And that he sees as the number one risk of our society. And this tied back in with something I read and then have really been observing is you'll read these economic reports and government reports. Oh, inflation is abating. We're turning the corner. And they're right when you dig into the numbers. Used cars did this and durable goods that and blah, 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 right? That doesn't do the guy down at the local grocery store any good whatsoever. He doesn't care that it's abating. It moved by 0.1% year over year and blah, blah, and all these numbers that I throw out there too, right? He doesn't feel 0.1% when eggs are up 8% in a month.
Right.
Yep.
Instead of being 8.1, right?
It collides with his lived experience, right? You tell me that the economy is doing great because of Bidenomics. Great. You know what? Across the street at the gas station where I get my gas, I'm still paying 15 cents more this week than I was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
right.
So tell me again about your economic miracle while I'm sucking down an extra 15 cents a gallon.
Right. And to your point earlier, guys like us, in fairness, we don't really feel that, right? And also to your point, the single mom of 3 kids, she feels that. And she's angry and she's frustrated. And there's more and more videos out there, and they're somewhat anecdotal. You see them all over Twitter and places of people sitting in their cars crying because they can't pay the bills and they're working, 50 hours a week.
Yeah.
And
that's real.
Rich can cite his chapter and verse on the history of what happens in that kind of an environment politically.
Right.
When you decouple the government from the populace to that degree, when people have real world economic pressures that are crushing them, that's you're rife for an extremist political dogma to slide right in there. I mean, let's face it, Napoleon didn't take over when things were good.
Right.
Yep.
Nor Hitler.
Or Hitler. That's exactly what I was going to say. Yep.
Franco.
Yep.
Pick a dictator.
The list goes on. Mussolini.
Mussolini.
Mhm.
You know, just pick one. But that's what you end up with, right? You can volunteer your way into fascism, but you got to fight your way out. Volunteer your way, you vote your way into communism, but you got to fight your way out. And that's what feeds back into what we were saying earlier about internal strife is the big concern.
Yes.
Yep, for sure. So that's something I'm seeing more and more of out there. Academic view of the world versus the real world, and most of the academics that are being all rosy about stuff, they're sitting on pretty cushy jobs, or they're working for a government institution somewhere where they're getting their nice cost of living increase that the regular folks aren't, because we're seeing manufacturing come down and things like that. So these factories are tightening up, and it's not just the wage, it's the number of hours worked too. When you go from a mandatory 50 a week down to 40, well, you lost 10 hours of pay, and that was at time and a half.
Yes.
And oh, by the way, food prices are creeping back up.
Sure.
They
say recession is when your neighbor loses his job. Depression's when you lose your job.
Right.
Exactly.
And look at the companies; they'll just stop hiring full-time employees. Right. They just hire a bunch of part-time employees.
And we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of that, and that's affecting the hiring numbers out there. Oh, hiring's up. Yeah, look at the full-time, part-time mix. It's exactly
they don't
what
have to
you
pay
described.
healthcare. That's the big cost.
Yep.
And then
exactly.
everybody moves into these gig economies where they're doing things, side gigs that put a little money in their pocket. And now the government's like, hey, shit, our tax revenues are taking a hit. We got to figure out a way to tax these guys.
Yep.
Let's tax their windows.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
For sure.
Johnny King says, I get my news here. But the number one reason for the average American to declare bankruptcy is unexpected healthcare expenses. So I think to your point about the gig economy that we're moving into, these people don't have any kind of corporate sponsored healthcare, right? So they're going, well, I'm young, then screw it. I'm not going to do it. I'll pay the Obama premium of $720 a year, whatever it costs to not have healthcare. But then they're going to have to go bankrupt when they get the least bit of, have to get that tumor removed or whatever,
Right. And we can take that back to, I mean, this is going a little far afield, but why is our health insurance mainly tied to employment? That was FDR in World War II. That's where that happened at. He started cranking down on there was wage caps. So the way employers would compete for employees, well, we can only have, if you're doing job X, we can only pay you $10,000 a year, whatever it was back then. Then they went, we can only pay you 10, but we're going to go and pick up your health insurance as well. And that morphed into health insurance being tied to your employment. And now look where that's gotten us.
I know, right?
And that same attitude is being used now. I mean, I will use the FBI as an example. There's a pay cap in the FBI, and I explained it in my award-winning book, Painting Over Rust. But the bosses can only make so much, and they've been capped out for years. And the underlings, myself included, our annual pay raises, cost of living allowances would go up, up, and up, and we were eventually packing in behind the bosses. So it got to a point like when I was working at the firearms training unit, my boss was a 15, I was a 14, but I'd been on long enough, and the pay compression was such that he was making $5,000 a year more than I was. And I looked at all the headaches and the hassles he had to deal with, like dealing with people like me every day, a bunch of us like that. And I'm like, where's the incentive to go there? Well, the same thing's happening with the bigger bosses. So what they've done now is they've cut out any bonus structure that they used to have for the underlings, myself included. They used to have different ways you could make additional money. Those are all gone. They've been gone for years. They give the bonuses to the bosses. So yes, the boss has a pay cap of, let's say, $155 a year. It's more than that now, but let's just suppose this for our conversation. But then at the end of the year, you're going to get a $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 bonus. So it doesn't count as your pay. In the bonus.
Right.
And okay, we're going to screw the little people so that we can pay you.
Yeah.
So this is my point being, this is an old technique.
Yeah. Right.
It's been around for a long time, and it's still alive and well today.
Yep. Because human nature, right?
Right.
We're all gonna game the system. So, yep. So I see this as a rising threat this disconnect between the academics and the real world. And the academics, of course, feed the politicians, right? Biden famously said last year there was a month-over-month inflation of 0 from, I think it was June to July. But the year-over-year rate was running somewhere in the 6s, right? And he got up there and went, inflation is 0 month over month. Come on. I mean, maybe he understood the difference. Maybe he did. But somebody fed him a talking point, right? Because he doesn't feel inflation. And in fairness, neither does Trump, right? But somebody fed him a talking point that anybody who understood how the numbers work went, yeah, no, that's way out of context.
Well,
right?
But most people don't understand the way the numbers work, and he's just our own little presidential Ron Burgundy. You know he'll read anything you put on the teleprompter. You know?
What does San Diego mean again? So, yep. So if we go on to the next one there, Rich, this was off Drudge, and this is, again, stocks are at an all-time high. Stock market is supposed to reflect the economy, right? But house sales are also at slowest in 29 years, going back to 1995, like we talked about. So where do the wealthy have the majority of their assets? Stock market or housing? Stock market, by far, right? And then where do your regular folks, your middle class folks, have the majority of their wealth? Home equity.
Yeah.
So now you're getting a further dichotomy. The folks who have stocks, which is going to be not just high income earners or high wealth people, but also academics, because they can look and see stock market, during inflationary times, stock market does well. That's where you want to have your money, right? So a further disconnect, and now it's a personal disconnect, because I'm looking at my personal financial sheet and I went and talked to my financial guy and I'm doing great. I don't know what these people are whining about. They should do something. Well, when they don't have any extra money at the end of the month because of inflation, it's kind of tough to do something.
Fair point.
So some small percentage of that crew turns to criminality.
Yes.
Right. And that's where you're going to just have financial pressures pushing people, not a lot, but a small measurable percentage will turn to criminal behavior. And those that are already of a criminal bent might up their game from burglary to robbery, let's say. They're going to stop breaking into just houses. Now they're going to confront people on the street. And I think that is where you're going to see the intersection of the American Warrior Society with these macroeconomic factors that we talk about quite frequently.
Yeah.
100%.
Yep. Rich, we'll have you take us out here with Javier Milei.
Yeah, the new president of Argentina is doing some amazing stuff down there. It says, if printing money would end poverty, printing diplomas would end stupidity. Love that quote. He ain't wrong.
There you go.
That's right. Yep. So
it simplifies things when people still don't understand.
Yeah. Very true.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for being on today. Dr. Fuller and Will, this has been an amazing show. We need to do these the menage a trois shows a little bit more often.
Let's dress appropriately. Yeah, more oil in the beard maybe next time.
Who would like to take us out?
I think you should, Rich. You haven't been here in a while.
Yeah, you've missed out.
Yeah. Well, first, let me thank both of you gentlemen for taking the mantle and taking the helm of the show and keep it going, even though that I was off playing on the other side of the pond. So thank you to very, very much. And I'm sure everybody out there in Warrior Nation would like to pat you guys on the back, buy you a beer when they see you, because without people like you and the people that watch the show, we wouldn't have a show. And I think Johnny King, for saying, hey, I got my news here. Well, it takes a lot of work to curate the news and look for trends and try to spot things ahead. So hats off to Will, as always, for doing that, and Dr. Fuller as well. And guys and gals out there, Warrior Nation, remember, I say this every week, the fight is coming. Be ready.